Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give it just a minute for people to trickle in, and then we'll get started tonight. All right, we're slowly going to get the ball rolling here. And as you enter, you're going to see momentarily a poll launch. We'll have one short one at the beginning and one at the end. So if you don't mind just filling that out. And again, you'll see that launch momentarily. Thank you guys for joining tonight. I'm going to give you maybe just 30 seconds or so to just fill that out. And then we're going to start up with our SAT info for the day. We're scheduled for an hour. I think probably a presentation will take 45-ish minutes, and then I'll leave some time for questions at the end. All right. So my name's Tal Kitron. I'm an elite tutor and executive function coach with Alparuth. I've been with the company for about 11 years now, in various capacities. But right now, I'm in Colorado and I work remotely, just tutoring online via Zoom for the most part. And SATs, one of I would say my bread and butter. I do a lot of SAT prep. And so today we're going to talk about this digital SAT, which changed a year or so ago, talk about the format, how to prepare strategically, and just look at the question types that you can expect. So my goal would be to make this like a mini tutoring session where we really take a look at the whole SAT and kind of how to game the system a bit, but also just what to expect. You should see a Q&A function, and you can certainly put questions in there. I won't answer them till the end, but like I said, we will save some time for that. Here's our plan today. We're going to look at the format of the digital SAT. We'll look at the verbal sections, so reading and writing, and major strategies you can use. Then, of course, we'll switch to math, talk major strategies there. And throughout, just really want to give you guys techniques and little tips and tricks that you can immediately apply to a practice test or even an official SAT, if you're taking it in March, for example. So let's start with the format. One thing that hasn't changed over the years too much is the perfect SAT score has almost always been a 1600. So that's still the gold standard. A perfect SAT score is 1600. The SAT is scored on a curve, meaning it's not your typical test where you have to get a perfect score to get a perfect score. You can miss a question here or there, and depending on the test date and just that curve, missing a couple questions might still be enough for a perfect score. Sometimes missing 2 questions drops us 20 or 30 points. Depends on the test. You get 400 points just for showing up. So 200 on verbal, 200 on math. And then max is 800. So you get up to 800 on verbal, up to 800 on math, and then those are added together for your total composite score. One of the biggest changes besides the SAT just moving to the computer, which of course is a huge shift, is that it is now section adaptive. We're going to talk about that a bit on the next slide. But what we can expect is no set test form, but verbal module 1 and then section 3, math module 1, are going to be like normal, kind of the regular level. Based on how you perform on those, the second and fourth modules will adapt to either be much harder or quite a bit easier. And we want them to be harder because then you're in the higher scoring bracket, whereas if they're easier, your score ceiling and floor are quite a bit lower. So we'll talk about that. It's not question adaptive, meaning let's say you get the first 5 questions right on module 1. That does not mean that the next 10, 15 questions are going to change. All that matters is how you do in total on section 1. So of the 27 questions, if we get like 21 or 22 correct, that's probably enough to make it to the upper level second module. Again, section 2 will vary based on how you perform on module 1, and section 4 math will vary based on how you do on module 3, the first math section. Something to keep in mind is that earlier questions, so things on modules 1 and 3, are going to affect your scores much more than the upper level modules. But also, if you make it to module 2 and 4 and realize, man, this is super easy, that's actually not a good thing, right? I would say once students have prepped, they're usually going to be making into the upper level modules. And so we don't have to think about that at that stage, but it's something to consider when you're just starting out with SAT and test prep. Because of that, we don't always go in order. On sections, you want to find the easy points and just grab as many easy points as you can, the low-hanging fruit. A little more on the format. So again, sections 1 and 2 are verbal. There are 54 total questions, so 27 questions per section, 32 minutes. So unless you have an extended time accommodation, you get 32 minutes for 27 questions. And we're going to look at all the question types and approaches. Then for math, we actually have fewer questions, but more time. So 22 questions and 35 minutes for that. Total, just over 2 hours and just under 100 questions. There's also some unstored questions, but again, it's something like the adaptive modules that you can't really consider as you're taking the test. But it is important to know that a couple of questions from each section are experimental and therefore won't affect your score. And again, this is just regular time. Many of my students have accommodations like a 504 plan or IEP at school. Then if you have that, you're likely eligible for extended time on the SAT and should apply with College Board for like time and a half is the most usual accommodation. This test is quite a bit shorter than it used to be. It used to be over 3 hours. So like for students with ADHD who have time and a half, it was a blessing and a curse because yeah, we need the time, but then you're there for 5 hours. And if lack of focus is an issue, that's a long time to be sitting and taking a test. So I love the fact that it's quite a bit shorter. And we also have more time per question. It just doesn't feel like as much of a time crunch, although people will probably be rushed at certain points on the upper level modules. But you can expect a Saturday morning, just 2.5 hour commitment. It's a lot less than it used to be, which is nice. So now let's get into the important stuff. We're going to talk about the content first of verbal and some strategies for each question type. This is where, like, if you have questions and we need to go back to a slide at the end, we can certainly do that. So first, some overall strategies that apply to both verbal and math. Active reading is different than it used to be because it used to be pencil in hand, right? Active reading means just moving, underlining, circling, starring, taking little notes, as opposed to passive reading, which is kind of like this, and then like that, and like that, and then we're in trouble. So even though it's on the computer and passages are much shorter, there's still quite a bit of reading comprehension on verbal. So you got to know what the question's asking. Maybe use the highlighter tool on the Blue Book app, which we'll show you in a moment. Scratch paper is provided for verbal. So maybe we take little notes on scratch paper. I don't know how many students would actually probably do that. But the answer eliminator, I think for verbal will be the most important thing. And then we'll talk about the Desmos calculator for math. And then just one other strategy is there's no guessing penalty. There have been tests in the past, like the SSAT and old SAT, where you would get points off for wrong answers. That's no longer the case. So let's say you have 5 questions left, but you're out of time. My recommendation is bubbling the same answer down. So I said C, but it could easily be B or D. But if you go B, 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 you probably won't get all of those questions, but you probably won't miss them all either. And so strategically, probability-wise, instead of Christmas treeing it, you're better off bubbling straight down the line if you do run out of time on a few questions. And if that happens, that is not the end of the world, right? But treat it strategically. So let's talk reading and writing. We said 2 32-minute modules, 27 minutes per module, which gives us an average of a bit over a minute per question, but not all questions are created equal, as we will see. Long gone are the days of 4 long passages with 10 questions each. That's more of an ACT thing now. For the SAT, you can see here, like it's a short passage and just either like a sentence completion or a inference, one question associated with each short passage. So we're spending much less time with each bit of material. And you can see it right there, right? Short passages, one question per, that's now just what the SAT verbal is. So you're not going to see grouped questions or long passages at all. Here's what you will see when you open up the test. And I mentioned Blue Book a couple times. The Blue Book app, so it's an app you download on your computer. It's a free app. It is the College Board app on which you take the PSAT. So probably everyone's done that in school at some point, 10th or 11th grade year. And it's also the app on which we take practice and the official SAT. You can see up top, time starts ticking down. You can choose to hide it. Most students don't, but you certainly can. What we also see is, the annotate button, top right. That allows you to just drag and highlight text and it'll stay highlighted. But the most important thing by far is that little ABC with a slash. And it's possible if my camera is covering that, you can slide that away, or my face. The ABC with the slash is the answer eliminator. And for verbal in particular, I would always have it engaged. You can still pick a right answer while you're eliminating. And it just allows us to kind of stay focused on the right process. We're not looking for perfect good answers. We're trying to see what did the writers put in there that was wrong. And then that little mark for review button, if you click that and then you hit the black button on the bottom, you can see all the questions, including ones that you've marked for review. Other than that, you back, next, right? You can navigate between questions that way. And again, we don't have to go in order. But this is what the SAT looks like now. So no more Scantron bubbling in, no more test booklet, just this. First questions you will always see are vocab and context. Just put an example up here. We're not going to do these. I just want to show you what they look like. They're typically questions 1 through 4 on the verbal modules. And my recommended strategy for this, which I will reiterate, but it's none of this is rocket science, but it is methodical and you want to be deliberate. So don't just go, I'm going to look for the best answer. That will lead you the wrong direction. Instead, predict your own word or phrase if you can. If you can't, that's okay. Then eliminate bad choices, especially if there are words that we really are familiar with. If you're left with more than one answer, plug in as needed, analyze word roots, see what just sounds good to you in context. There's usually a couple bad answers and a couple decent ones. And again, about questions 1 through 4, sometimes a few more, but usually it's the first 4 questions, vocab. Don't have to start with them, but most people will. Another type of question you have to look out for is command of evidence. We'll see in a minute, these show up sometimes with graphs as well. You'll see them in the heart of the SAT verbal. Between questions 5 and 16 is where the long comprehension questions are. And the process here is read the question, read the passage, eliminate, do not go to a good answer, but eliminate the bad answers, right? Picture these basement dwelling test writers writing test questions all day, every day. Their job is write a question and a correct answer, then 3 choices to fool us. If we can find what they put in, like the throwaway words to make these answers wrong, we can be much more sure of our correct answer, right? At least wrong. Our goal in the end is objectively an answer that makes you say, I can't argue with that. Not I love it, not it's perfect, but well, yeah, that's true. I can't argue with it. That's a good reading answer. Another question type you will see between 5 and 16 is inference. It will always read as which choice most logically completes the text. And if you know what inference means, it means like taking a leap of judgment. On these tests, you don't really have to infer much. You should look at connector words like however and therefore, but read the question, read the passage, eliminate answers. And then again, I can't argue with that. So generally there's like some very strong words. So something like always or never. We don't really like those words. We like less flashy answers. And sometimes vague and general is better for verbal. So command of evidence, inference, definitely going to come in that middle range. At the very end, you're going to see these bullet point questions. It is incredibly important to get to them with time to spare because they are generally quick and easy. They're the last few questions, anywhere from like 2 to 4 or 5. And your job is basically ignore the bullets, ignore the left-hand side, but read the question. So here, like, what does the student want to do? Oh, introduce the research of Aubrey and Schmidt to an audience already familiar with global warming. Usually you can go straight down the line and eliminate choices that just don't do that. If there are multiple decent answers, that's when you use the bullet points to just double check. But honestly, I would say at least 4 out of 5 times, you will not need the bullet points to answer these questions. And that's why they're so quick, they're so simple. So even though at the very end, you have to make sure you're not running out of time on these. You'd rather run out of time on this, trust me, right? Or this. Because that's going to take forever and be less certain, whereas we can be pretty certain on a question like this or a grammar question. Just a couple more, then we'll go to math. So most important thing to prepare for, let's say you were taking the SAT, this coming weekend. For verbal, I would say study your clauses and punctuation rules. You need to know what a dependent, independent clause are. You need to know how semicolons and periods work and how they're the same usually. Get comfortable with the use of a colon. A colon must follow an independent clause and must introduce something, but not necessarily a list. And so a lot of the punctuation is knowing the rules, but also knowing in which order to test them, right? Because periods and semicolons have very easy rules. They got to separate full sentences. Easy to tell if an answer is going to be right or wrong in that regard. And same with colons, honestly. But commas do so many things that I don't want to even look at a comma answer unless I absolutely have to, because they're more confusing and they'll give people much more trouble. Here's what a clause question would look like. And here right away, I would know that A and B are identical and therefore both wrong. Again, A and B, one has a semicolon, one has a period, nothing else has changed around them. They're the same, they're both wrong. So that's a nice, easy trick. I highly recommend testing the answers in the order of ease. So periods and semicolons first, then colons because there is a specific rule, then dashes because if we have one, we usually have two. Then if you're choosing between like C and D here, test C to see if it works. And if it doesn't, then we'll pick D. But we're not really testing the comma unless we have to. Aside from the bullet point and connector questions, these are the most important. Standard English conventions is also what they're called, and they come between about questions 16 and 23. You look at the answer choices to say, oh, what are they testing here? Is it like possession or clauses or pronouns? And then just eliminate the answers that are grammatically incorrect. That'll usually get us to the right one. So again, most important thing, if you were just having, a couple hours to study verbal, I would just spend my time on standard English conventions and make sure to nail those. Connectors are kind of in between the grammar and the bullet point ones. So again, towards the end, just a couple quick notes here that however and nevertheless are the same. They both mean the same thing. They're both contrast words. And then on the other end of the spectrum, therefore, thus, hence, consequently, are also all the same. They're all cause and effect words. For these, you just look before, look after, decide if we need contrast or not, and then pick accordingly. I mentioned earlier that under command of evidence, you have some graph questions. These can be pretty easy on module 1 and very hard on module 2 sometimes. What you'll do for these is read the question, of course, read the passage, and then the answers. So even though the graph is just like right there for us, we don't really evaluate it until you're looking at the choices. And that's when we can be a bit of a perfectionist and look at like, okay, the title, the axes, the key, and all that. On module 1, it's possible that 3 of the choices are just going to be wrong and just easily crossed out. But a lot of times they'll all be true, and we need the one that's relevant to the passage and logically makes sense. So these can be more involved, sometimes skippable, and then you come back if you have time later. Your job on SAT is preserve momentum, confidence, comfort, and sometimes that means skipping the hard questions and not spinning your tires. So here's the strategy. And first, just kind of look at where the questions are. and I'll talk about what to do for each. Someone I'm usually going to answer the questions at the end, but as we look at this, someone asked about if a student has a 504 plan or accommodations for extra time in school, are you able to be placed in a different classroom than the rest of those taking the SAT? The answer is yes. Sometimes though, like if you have time and a half and there's several other students who do, it's not like you're not alone, but you're in a smaller room. But yes, definitely, if you have time and a half, you should not be in the same room as people with regular time. Yeah, that was a good question. So again, I would say most important thing is going to be like make sure that you get to these and you really get near perfect on them on both modules 1 and 2. People are losing easy points on grammar, and it's just the simplest and quickest thing to fix, in my opinion, on verbal. So that's where I would focus energy if it was me or my student, and that's how I try to treat all my students is what I do, or if I had a kid, what would I tell them to do? So for vocab, we said predict your own word or phrase. It's not always possible, but usually we can. Eliminate and then plug in. There are definitely some vocab resources. I don't think it's as important as it was once upon a time, but if vocab is a struggle, make sure you brush up and do flashcards. Longer questions. So read the question, read the passage, and eliminate, right? Not looking for good answers, but ones we cannot argue with. So try to be subjective and remember you're one of many people taking the same test. Grammar, very crucial. Look at the answer choices to see what they're testing and then eliminate them and trust your ear if needed. Meaning like a comma makes a long pause, and if that sounds bad, it's wrong. And then those bullet point questions, remember, we don't usually need the bullets, but if multiple answers remain, you can use those facts to match. That'll happen maybe a couple of the hard ones on module 2. So that's verbal, and again, we can have questions about that later, but let's make sure we talk through math. Doing well on time. I think this will probably take us a little over 20 minutes. On the left is what is provided. I'll show you where in Blue Book in a second, but you are provided a math reference sheet with geometry, formulas, and shapes. Math, we said, is 22 questions in 35 minutes, so a minute and a half per question, but they get harder as they go. I would expect the first 10 to be very, very, very easy, sometimes almost alarmingly so. Where it's like, wow, is that really it? And the answer can be yes. The older SAT was a more of a like reading comprehension test, even on math. So many, many word problems. But the digital SAT is less so. More algebra, more of a pure math test, numbers, not words. And don't forget these geometry formulas are there. So you don't need to memorize them as much as you need to know what they are and that they are provided. "18 of 22 questions are multiple choice. 4 of them are grid-ins, also known as SPR or student produced response. These free response questions require you to just type in an answer. They can take longer because sometimes we can use the answers as guides. And this information is all given on test day. You don't want to have to look at it, but they basically show you right here what is acceptable and what is not. Noticing just that you shouldn't round. So 2/3, if that's an answer, 0.66 won't cut it. You don't round if you're doing the decimal, you just do 0.6 repeating. You can't enter mixed numbers, of course, only fraction like 7/2, not 3 1/2, because that looks like 31/2. And again, on the bottom one, just don't round, right? So again, this is provided, but you want to have this knowledge before you go into the SAT and know kind of what to expect and what is and is not an acceptable answer. Here's what the Blue Book SAT math module looks like. So let's get our bearings. You'll have the time ticking down, would actually start at 35. We've got answer eliminator, which is less helpful on math than verbal. And then mark for review if we need to skip something, move past it, very valuable. But the two big things are going to be the reference sheet, which if you hit that little X squared thing, that'll give you the geometry shapes I showed you earlier. And then the calculator. I mean, this is the biggest thing on the test, the biggest game changer. The thing on math that if you had only 2 hours to prepare for a test, I would say go do this. Go practice Desmos, which is what we're going to do today. You click that icon and here's what pops up, the thing on the left. You can then expand it to make it bigger, and you'll see that on the right. If anyone's ever used this, which many students have at some point, it is just a graphing calculator that can do, I don't want to say 90%, but 70% of the SAT math questions can probably be done just solely on Desmos. Doesn't mean it's always the best move, but it is usually the quickest and most, I don't know, efficient, but also effective way to solve for especially algebra problems. You can bring your calculator, your like TI-84 or whatever, and probably should, but the Desmos option is just right there. You just click it open. It's right by the content. Questions here, graph is there. Very convenient in the way that we're honestly going to want to solve most problems. So even if you feel like, oh, I'm good with my calculator, I don't need this, I would guarantee there are some things that you can do to make your life easier on Desmos. And as a tutor, like that's how I see a big part of my job is how do I make my students' life easier? Obviously, we want to open up opportunities, boost scores, but it's how do I help them understand the test drivers, make this a simpler process. So one thing we'll look at is systems of equations. If you want a solution to a system, you can just plug them in and see where they cross. That's the answer. The first module is very simple in general, but also I think Desmos makes it even easier. I would say its utility is more going to be for the hardest questions for a lot of my high scoring students. Because for the easy problems, we almost want to be doing the algebra and basic math to make sure we are confident with it, whereas some of the harder ones are almost impossible without Desmos, so it will take too long. Here's what we are looking at for math. So again, this is all about knowing what to expect. On the current SAT, 70% of the math content is algebra, because advanced math is just like algebra 2, and then algebra 1 would just be the basic algebra. And then like the other 30%, some geometry and trig, and then some problem solving stats. This would be like ratios, unit conversion, probability, stuff like that. And we're going to look at each area and just kind of what questions might look like. And then we'll specifically practice with Desmos just a little bit. Math strategy, not to sleep on. Number one, always know what you're solving for. A lot of people just start and they solve for something wrong. And there's an answer choice that gives it, so they circle it, they move on, but then realize, oh, I was supposed to get 2x, not x. So before you start, plan it out. Are we doing math or are we just graphing it? Right? And then do your computation. Skip no steps, write everything down, and then double check that you answered exactly what the question asks, right? Of course, we have to move quickly, but you can do a quick logic check for a geometry question in particular. So yeah, again, none of these strategies are rocket science, but they are about developing patterns and methodical processes that we can repeat over and over. I like to tell my students to start with basic algebra. If you can do a basic math step, we might not need Desmos, and then we don't risk typing something in incorrectly. So we rely on our skills to isolate X or Y, right? Or combine like terms. We've all done that. Factoring, foiling usually can be done on Desmos, I'll admit. But then distributing and substituting, we do that all the time in any math. If you try those, or like you see a question, you're like, man, it's algebra, but none of these are going to do anything, then go to the answer choices, right? Maybe those will help. You can work backwards. If it says a word like integer or it's abstract, pick numbers, right? Percent, you can always pick 100 and work with it. And then definitely, I won't allow it, but don't forget about Desmos. I'm sure once we're done today, you won't. So we're going to look at the content areas, just a couple of problems that I would say would be typical examples for each. Starting with basic algebra, which is rusty for most students. So I spent a lot of time on it because y equals mx plus b, people have just not thought about it in a while. Almost every single question on this section can be done in Desmos very simply. because you can just type equations in. But we'll see equations of a line with one or two variables. We'll see functions, which are also usually linear, and then systems of equations or inequalities. Here's a couple of examples of what that could look like. And not going to do them, I'll just leave them up for a minute so you guys can see. So number of solutions is definitely a big repeat question type. And then sometimes they're just asking you to model and interpret a meaning of something. So with that, maybe picking numbers and plugging in like 0 or 1 to see what the reality is. Next big topic is advanced math, which is also algebra, but more stuff like exponents and roots, and then parabolas, polynomials. So when we talk about solutions there, we usually mean x-intercepts, right? Values of x that make y 0, also things that people have learned and often forgotten or are rusty with. Much of this stuff can also be done in Desmos, but sometimes you have to get creative and pick numbers or use x instead of like an n or different variables. Here are a couple of ways this could look. I think the one on the right is the most common, where it's just giving almost a physics equation where it says, hey, what are we asking for? The x-intercept, the y-intercept, the vertex is a common one. I think you'll definitely expect to see that stuff, and then maybe just a bit of review from algebra class or even a science class would help. And we'll talk at the end about resources. Like Alpert has an amazing book. You don't have to get tutoring to use it or to buy it. And it's fairly reasonable, but it breaks down every single question type and topic and gives you practice and really nice exercises and guidance. So I'm biased, but I think that would be another really good way to learn this stuff. Third, we got problem solving and data analysis. So 15 to 20% of the math test, I think closer to 15. And you're going to see a lot of ratios and rates. That also comes up in geometry, so similar triangles. Dimensional analysis, percentages, and then basic stats, a lot of which can be done on Desmos, mean, median, standard deviation, and then some probability. A lot of this involves just being very, very careful, reading questions carefully and writing it all out. Here are a couple examples. I don't consider these like incredibly difficult questions. And I will say that both could be done in Desmos. The left one, you can write 124800, no commas, equals X percent of 1600000. So again, 1,248,000 equals, literally write equals X percent of 1.6 million, and it'll just graph you the answer, straight line answer at 78% or whatever it is. On the right-hand side, if you type in the word mean, you can literally do this on testing. You open the calculator, you type the word mean with parentheses, and you put these numbers in parentheses with commas between, it will just give you the mean. So like there is no math to do really on these. It's just understanding what the question's asking. It should also be obvious on the right side that data set T will have a greater mean because it doesn't have that one, the small outlier. And then last and kind of least is geometry and trig. So basic stuff, lines, angles, right triangles, regular triangles, perimeter, area, volume. Part of this is just remembering Pythagorean theorem and that it is provided, right? So just knowing some of the things and knowing that there's a reference sheet when needed. But this is another one where a lot of times people haven't learned this since ninth grade. And so when they're taking the SAT, they have forgotten it and just don't really have a great feeling about some of the trig and geometry. So it takes a refresher. Here's what those questions would look like. You can just see like the left one would probably involve Pythagorean theorem. because it's a right triangle and a root. And on the right side, it's alternate interior, alternate exterior, and being very careful what you're solving for. So some blast from the past there for sure. Last big thing today is I just want to look at how we use Desmos. You can create tables. Desmos.com, you can open the graphing calculator and just practice, and it's a good idea. There's plenty of YouTube and Reddit tutorials, I'm sure. Reddit tutoring, of course, is a good option. But if we want to picture a question rather than do the math, a lot of times you can just graph it and the answer is just right there for us. So like, just look at a couple of very simple examples. Like here's one. Two equations, both linear. 6x plus 10y equals 60. 9x minus 5y equals 30. They say the solution is xy, so that's a point. What is the value of y? If this was the ACT, or a few years ago, I would say, well, we should isolate and substitute, or maybe use elimination. But today, I will say, put it in Desmos. First equation in expression 1, don't even need to isolate y or put it in slope-intercept, you just put it in. Second, in the second expression, and then we click on where they intersect. They wanted the y, so our answer is 3. The risk we run would be plugging it in wrong, I guess, like not, typing an x instead of a y or just a plus instead of a minus. But this is a very easy question, right? It's just where do they cross? And we see it. Here's another. The function above has zeros, aka solutions at points A and B on an xy coordinate plane. What's the length of that line segment? So I could kind of try to think about, all right, what are the x-intercepts? Let's try to factor it. But if I'm just looking for the distance between the x-intercepts, we're going to graph it on Desmos. You can click on the two x-intercepts. 3 minus negative 3.5 is 6.5. That would be the answer. Right? We've graphed it. We've clicked on the x-intercepts. Those are the solutions because they are the values of x that make y 0. And the answer is C. Can make that look easy. I mean, the math isn't necessarily, but this is an easy question because of the tools available. And then functions, you can see here this cubic polynomial, 2x cubed minus 3x plus 4. And then 4 answers asking us like which one of these gives us correct points. Plugging in would be fine here. Most people will just do it that way. It may be overkill, but I do want you to see that for even a question like this, you can type table or add a table in Desmos. This is something I recommend practicing, and it'll create a table. So if you type in the points, there will appear this little thing right here that allows you to make a regression, linear, quadratic, exponential. So it'll give you the actual equation. What they did here was they actually wrote the equation out and then created a table from that equation. So then we could see, oh, these are the points that are actually on that graph. This is something that probably, like if you're unfamiliar with Desmos, won't make perfect sense yet. You'll have to just practice a little bit, play around with it. But the table is something that can be extraordinarily useful, make your life really, really easy. And then here's a word problem. Last one we're going to look at on Desmos. Give you a moment to read that. So we've got an inequality, maybe 2 of them, and they tell you costs of tablets and laptops and the budget, but then also how many tablets we're supposed to buy. So this one's a little trickier. And again, since I'm going on another screen, it might be hard to follow, but you can type in, okay, I know that's got to be more than 150 tablets. And then the other inequality is about money. So this is just like equations. We see where they cross, and then that can inform you as to what would and would not fit in the inequality. So like it looks like 102 would be the maximum amount of laptops because you can't have 102.3 laptops. So I think, again, this may not click with everyone, same with this one, but that's okay. Just the main lesson is Desmos can solve an inordinate amount of questions. That's kind of my point I'm trying to get across. Math recap as we kind of get towards the end here. Solve for what they're asking for. Pay attention to detail and leave nothing blank. We have to move quickly, but not too quickly. I strongly recommend strategically skipping around to grab the easiest points for you. So if you see a question like trigonometry and it's not clicking, move past it. Do the algebra one that comes next. And then given formulas, Desmos, your calculator, there's usually a simple method of solving. So that's my main recap is study your algebra, refresh it, practice Desmos, and don't overthink. How to practice. Appruth has 4 digital adaptive SAT tests. What's nice about these is that they offer these really detailed reports that you can go over afterwards on your own or with a tutor. So I'll always start my first session with a student of like, hey, let's go over your mock test and we'll look at these specific questions that gave you trouble. College Board or Blue Book has 7 practice SATs and 2 digital PSATs. Those are on the app. A new resource is the Gemini app. So that's AI, but they have come up with some, I haven't tried it yet, but some students have. They have test prep if you download the app and just ask for SAT prep, some cool 3 practice tests, I think. The SAT guide, which I mentioned, I mean, truly great illustrations and really good breakdowns. And then there's something called the SAT Suite Question Bank, which I usually would use as the last thing. It has questions from Blue Book tests and other places, but you can focus in on specific types and skill level, difficulty level, sorry. Here's our last slide, just kind of what's available here. It's a QR code for AP. We're also going to launch one more poll, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So I don't really do a whole lot of AP tutoring, but we have many tutors who do. And I know that that's just approaching. So if your student or you are struggling in an AP class and want some support, there's some workshops coming up, and you can also do individual tutoring. You can see that QR code on the right. And then I'm just going to open it up for questions. If you feel like, hey, I've got what I need out of this, hopefully this was informative, feel free to call it a night, and thank you for joining. And yeah, if you got any questions for me, you got me for another 10, 15. You should see that second poll of just popped up. But I'm gonna leave it open for a bit to see if anyone has questions about the SAT format, content, strategies, tutoring, or anything else. And these are our 3 cornerstones. We see the APs, but we've also got academic tutoring, test prep, which is mostly what I do, and then EF coaching if you're just struggling with procrastination, time on task, and so on, which many students do. A few more minutes for questions, but of course, if we don't have any, then I'll consider it a job well done and we'll call it a night. All right, here's the first question is, when should we take the first SAT or have our student take the first SAT? Yeah, timeline-wise, we didn't talk a whole lot about it because it varies, but I would say high-scoring students should start summer before junior year, just in case they want a really good PSAT score. Most students start when they're pretty much complete with Algebra 2 is what you want to have under your belt. So I think you could start prep junior year and take your first test like in October or November or December. But I think second semester junior year is also okay. The big thing is by summer before senior year, you would love to have a couple of tests under your belt. So you ideally only have like one more as like a finishing touch. So differs for people. There's no like perfect time to start. If you're a super high scorer, I'd say summer after sophomore year. And if you're kind of more middle of the pack or not like elite upper echelon test scores, you could start junior year at some point. Like I've got a lot of students who are taking their first official SAT in March of this year, and we just started tutoring, end of last year. Other questions. So there's actually an ACT presentation that I'm giving on, I believe, Thursday. The question is, how do we know whether to take SAT or ACT? What are the differences? There's a lot of overlap, especially now. The way to find out is take a practice test of each and prep to your strength, right? So whatever you are stronger with, if they're even, whatever you like better. Differences would be the ACT is more all over the place for math. They want you to know a little bit about a lot. There's also an optional science section, and then the reading passages are longer. It's a bit more of a time crunch, but generally, I would say ACT is simpler than the SAT. The SAT is more focused in on knowing your algebra and comprehending short passages. But a lot of overlap, probably 80% overlap between SAT and ACT. So if you ever have to switch, which happens rarely, you can. The idea and the goal would be focus on one or the other. Question about the recording. Yes, I believe that the recordings are sent to registered participants on Friday, the week of the presentation. So yes, that should be sent out. Reach out to the email below if for some reason you don't get it by Friday. And then, yeah, there's group classes all spring and summer. I don't know that I'm signed up to teach any of them yet, but we definitely offer a lot of good online group SAT and ACT classes. And for some students, especially as like a first thing, it's a good thing rather than diving into individual tutoring. If you're a really high scorer, the group classes aren't always the best move, but they're generally extremely comprehensive and cover a lot of good ground in a way that's pretty accessible. And yeah, there should be classes all year. Yeah, thank you. Good questions. Okay, got a couple more. Well, first question is just about logistically, if you want to use Alpha services for SAT following this next one, best way to get started is just shoot an email to the email address below or call the office. But I would say just a message with what you said, like, hey, my student, and then a client services person would reach out for more info. My schedule is pretty full. You can actually request to work with me directly as a tutor. And if I have time and availability, I'll certainly be happy to. I do a lot of my work through requests, but we also just have a ton of great tutors at different levels and rates. Another question, is it good to focus on math during one test and then verbal the next, or better to improve the overall score in a single testing experience? I get that a lot. It is very rare that you should focus on one or the other. So only if like you're like a college super scores, meaning they take your highest test scores from multiple sittings. So like verbal from November and then math from December. But it's really rare. Like if you've already got an established great verbal score, you could focus just on math. But I would say 99 times out of 100, it's better to do both. Yeah, you can put more energy into one, but I wouldn't just say, let's just do math this time and just verbal. It just usually doesn't work out very well. It's not the best strategy. But it is a good question that I get a lot. All right. Great questions. I don't see any more, but again, follow up to this email. If you have any more, I got one more to pop up that I'll answer now. But if anything else comes up, you have any questions about the slides or anything, just shoot a message and someone will get back to you. Everyone's very approachable. Most of our client services folks are or were tutors at some point. All right, last question is more of a specific. So if we've got a baseline test score of 1530, which is outstanding, 740 math, 740 verbal, 790 math, my guideline would be the SAT Suite question bank and work with an individual tutor, like a really high level tutor, because you want to focus in on probably the toughest vocab, strategy for command of evidence, module 2. I would do all the blue book tests to get the upper level verbal modules done. And then I would do SAT Suite question bank and vocab practice. Yeah, but obviously you're in a great spot. It's hard to boost that. So you just want to give yourself the best chance by perfecting little things and strategies. Yeah, very tough to boost math from 790 to 800. That's one question. All right. I really appreciate you guys joining. Hope you got a lot out of it. See some of you for the ACT session on Thursday, I'm sure. And have a great rest of your night.